Hi, I'm Dr. Duke Pesta, Academic Director of Freedom Project Education and contributor to the New American Magazine. We're going to be talking some more Common Core with you today, and we're very lucky to have here in studio a special guest, Joy Pullmann. She's at the Heartland Institute in Chicago, and she is a real expert on Common Core standards when it comes to testing and when it comes to the very contentious issue of data mining. Welcome aboard, Joy.
Thanks.
Go ahead and give us an overview. I mean, the two areas of specialty for you are testing and data mining, and let the audience know what you see as the real problems in those areas with regard to Common Core.
Well, the first thing that people have to know is that testing is inseparable from Common Core. So that's both according to the people who started Common Core in the first place. So when governor signed a bunch of documents to say, yeah, we want to do this nationalization of an education project, one of the things that they signed on to was the Common Core initiative, and they defined it as standards plus assessments. So those assessments, those tests, are the enforcement mechanism to make sure that Common Core gets into the minds and into the hands of teachers and children in the classrooms. You know, it's not just a set of goals that people made up, but it actually is enforced, you know, on classrooms. And so the tests are inseparable to what Common Core is aiming to do with kids, and that's where we get all the problems with data mining that we talk about. But the biggest one, or kind of the basic setup, is that to administer a Common Core test, there are two national Common Core testing organizations. To administer one of those tests, states, and that's upwards of 40 states have decided that they're going to replace their state tests with Common Core tests. They signed a contract with those Common Core organizations, testing organizations, saying that they would give to them whatever data that they requested that they thought was necessary in order, you know, to put into their data banks that they're compiling about children. So for example, one of the organizations, Smarter Balanced, one of the testing groups, says that they're interested in looking at student behavior, their attitudes, their persistence, their discipline, and so forth. So a lot of non-academic things that a lot of parents aren't comfortable with having outside organizations collecting about their child. And so the reason I call this the student data pipeline is because states have promised these organizations they'll give this information to them, or basically giving them a blank check, whatever information they think is necessary, and they've promised that they'll change their state laws or their regulations according to whatever's necessary to get that carried out. And then these organizations, because they're funded only and exclusively by the federal government, have turned around and written contracts, signed contracts with the federal government saying, we'll give you open and complete access to all of this data. That's almost a word-for-word quote. Open and complete access to any and all data collected at the state level. So I call it the student data pipeline. It goes from the school, probably through the tests, but also through school employees that are collecting information about kids, what their family makes in a year, whether they are on federal free and reduced price lunch, their individual education plans, if they have special needs, their medical needs, and so forth. They put that into state databases, and states turn around, open it up to those Common Core organizations, which in turn open up to the federal government. So we have a mass of student information available and open and unprotected personal information about kids that is really literally being collected through Common Core.
Now, what would you say, Joy, about those critics out there who say, well, what could possibly be wrong with testing? What could possibly be wrong with one set of standards? And this is a softball question, I know. One set of standards, one set of tests to go with those standards. What are people not seeing who make that argument?
Well, the problem is when you create one governmentally enforced system of education that everybody has to buy into, you're kind of enhancing the education monopoly that the state already holds. And so the problem with that is that special interests, they seek out power sources, right? If you want to have influence over the nation, obviously, to get control over more kids, to have more of your policies enacted across more states and more school districts, then you have to seek out the areas where you can get that power. And so you're creating these power centers that are really attractive to special interests, and we know from the history of humankind that they are naturally going to seek that out. That's going to target. And the problem with special interests, of course, is they have time and money and the power to stay dogged on their pursuit of their goal day after day, week after week, year after year. Well, parents, like you and me, other citizens who are paying for public education, we have jobs, we have children. That's part of the reason we're invested in this. So while we're distracted minding our own business and caring about our duties, special interests are using all of our distraction, to capitalize on the power centers that have been set up neatly for them to capture. So that's why, for example, folks, when they want to get anything done, they try to have the federal government do it because it's so much work to go through all those annoying state legislatures and so forth. So just creating that sort of structure for education really makes it inevitable that bad things are going to be perpetuated on everybody beneath that structure.
Let me give you an example of that. We've been working working a lot lately at Freedom Project with Catholic schools. And one of the things that's so shocking to me is how many Catholic schools have signed on to this without having to.
Yeah.
It's completely voluntary for the private schools. And there's this weird notion among Catholic education administrators that we can somehow have Common Core, but this isn't going to pull us closer to the federal government.
Sure.
A federal government that, by the way, has been obviously hostile to Christianity in general and Roman Catholicism in particular. Think of the Health and Human Services mandate. One of the things that's most alarming about it, and here's one of those interest groups that is an example. It was a video of a Roman Catholic nun talking about why her Catholic school district was adopting Common Core. And she made the argument that all the public schools are going over to this.
Right.
And if we don't go over to this, we're going to be left out in the cold. Because what's happening, she admitted this, what's happening is all the textbook publishers have gone completely Common Core. So as a Roman Catholic school, her response was, unless we get on board doing with what the public schools do,
we'll have no textbooks.
we're not no textbooks. Rather than say, you know what, we're already performing at a much higher rate than the public schools. We're going to have our own schools and have our own textbooks and watch what would happen as this Common Core curriculum absolutely sinks, right? Like every other government standard sinks. The Catholic schools will be flooded with all sorts of new kids who actually want to learn something. But ironically, the Catholic schools are completely
like they have been for decades.
Completely selling out to Common Core. In other words, they're cutting their own throats. By joining the consortiums that are voluntarily using Common Core, they are furthering the process of the elimination of any textbook that's not Common Core.
Right. Well, that's the problem. I mean, the more that you join up with all the people who are doing things that take away your freedoms, the faster, of course, your freedoms are going to be taken away. Well, also, you're just thinking, you know, private schools offer an alternative to public schools. So if a parent is already annoyed with the public schools, what they're doing, they're going to look for something different. So if you're just going to do the same thing as a public school, you might as well be one. You
know, the funny thing is when we talk to moms and dads, Catholic school moms and dads, or private school moms and dads, they get it. When we talk to, in the case of the Catholic schools, that when we've been able to get in and see bishops and people who are above the education administration, they seem to get it. It's the educational administrators, and this is par for the course, because the same people who run Catholic schools education programs are the same people teaching in the public schools and the same people putting the curriculum together.
Well, because the only way to get a certification or a piece of paper saying that you're an education expert is to go through the monopoly, the teacher certification monopoly, the higher education, monopoly. The only, when that is completely clamped down, by folks who think that education doesn't mean learning things. It means, being a social justice person. It means, advocating for change in your community, and so on and so forth. So when you have all the teachers from, private, public, so on and so forth, being forced to all funnel through one way of training teachers and a really politicized and rotten higher education system, then you basically have the same bad ideas spreading everywhere. So that's the problem with the Common Core test, because then they make all the schools funnel in the same direction, not only just with their teacher training, but also with their curriculum.
Joy makes a great point. As somebody whose job is at the university level to help train future education majors, the entire curriculum is activist. It's not about education anymore. It's what you said at the beginning of your little comment there was fantastic, because it's 100% activism. And you see this, what's going to happen to the Catholic schools too, is this, or the private schools, this odd notion that you can somehow get in bed with government, and yet you'll be able to keep them at arm's length. We've seen historically what a losing proposition that is. Will you talk a little bit, though, about specifically, a little bit more about data mining, because this is the most shocking thing when we talk to families. Most families have no idea about this.
Sure.
And so give us a last word here about what you see the long-term dangers of data mining.
Well, we'll start with the fact that in 2012, the federal government basically rewrote federal privacy law called FERPA, the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, to say that it or any government entity or any private entity they designate, individual, business, they're allowed to share any information they have about your child without your knowledge or consent. So that's the way that the law is. So people think, oh, there's privacy laws. The privacy laws don't mean anything. And so what this means is that the more that people are able to get really highly personal information about you, the more sorts of, the real goal is social engineering. I don't like to use explosive sorts of things like that, but this is very obvious. The goal is to create a workforce that responds to the needs of the 21st century as determined by the central planners. And so the hope, this is literally, people say this, the idea is that the more data we can get on people, the more we can change people. So the idea is to basically get a blueprint. So for example, I just read this the other day, this wild thing. The Department of Defense put out a proposal requesting a contractor to build a portable EEG machine, and they envisioned that this would be used in classrooms to hook up every child with a brain scanner. That's what it is. It's a brain scanner to be feeding all of this data into a massive database. We know that the federal government can monitor and track, all to help improve education. That's always what happens when people want more data about your personal life. They want to improve things for you, but what they want to do is improve it in the way they want and take the power away from you to control things and make decisions about your own life with your own information and your own priorities.
Joy, if it walks like socialism, talks like socialism, and oppresses like socialism, the odds are pretty good at socialism. Well, these are some horrifying things, and the more you delve into Common Core, the more shocked you're going to be. Joy, it's a pleasure having you here today, and if you want more information, please go to thenewamerican.com.